The Forgotten Outpost. Dr. Elena Vasquez knelt beside a row of modified tomatoes, their crimson fruits gleaming under the artificial sunlight of Greenhouse 7. The soil beneath her gloved hands was rich and dark, carefully engineered to support Earth crops on this distant world. Each grain had been analyzed, processed, and enriched with nutrients specifically designed to accelerate plant growth in alien environments. Kepler 442 wasn't much to look at from orbit, just another rocky planet in humanity's expanding network of colonies, but to Elena, it was paradise incarnate. The planet's twin suns cast an amber glow through the transparent aluminum walls of the greenhouse, creating prismatic patterns across the carefully arranged growing beds. Elena had spent the last 5 years perfecting the atmospheric controls that made this miracle possible. The air mixture was precisely calibrated to Earth standards, but with subtle modifications that enhanced plant metabolism and growth rates. Every breath she took in this sanctuary reminded her why she had chosen to dedicate her life to feeding humanity's expansion across the stars. Agricultural Research Station Verdun 7 sprawled across a gentle valley between two low mountain ranges, its collection of greenhouses, laboratories, and living quarters looking more like a prestigious university campus than a frontier outpost. The facility covered nearly 50 square kilometers, with interconnected buildings linked by covered walkways that protected researchers from the planet's occasionally harsh weather patterns. The morning mist rose from the carefully tended fields where experimental crops grew in neat geometric rows, their leaves catching the alien sun's amber light like emerald jewels. This was humanity's most remote agricultural facility, located 3 months' journey from the nearest established colony and 6 months from any major population center. The isolation was intentional, chosen specifically to allow dangerous genetic experiments without risking contamination of established food sources. Verdun 7 was dedicated to one simple but vital mission: developing the agricultural technology that would feed humanity's expanding presence among the stars. Elena stood and brushed the rich soil from her knees, surveying the progress of her latest project with scientific satisfaction. These tomatoes had been genetically modified to grow in extreme conditions, their enhanced root systems capable of extracting nutrients from nearly barren soil, while their modified cellular structure could process atmospheric compositions that would kill normal Earth plants. Each specimen represented months of careful breeding and genetic engineering, designed to help struggling frontier colonies turn hostile wastelands into productive farmland. The work was slow, methodical, and absolutely crucial to humanity's expansion among the stars. Without reliable food production, colonies remained dependent on expensive supply runs from Earth and established worlds. Elena's research promised to change that dynamic forever, giving humanity the ability to become self-sufficient anywhere they chose to settle. She walked slowly through the greenhouse, noting the subtle variations in each plant variety. Row A contained tomatoes designed for high radiation environments, their leaves bearing a slight metallic sheen that indicated successful integration of radiation processing genes. Row B featured specimens adapted for low-gravity growing, their stems reinforced with modified cellulose that could support fruit development in minimal gravitational fields. Row C held her most ambitious creation: tomatoes that could process atmospheric nitrogen directly, eliminating the need for complex fertilizer systems. But hidden among these peaceful agricultural specimens were other varieties, plants that Elena hoped would never need to be activated. Deep in the restricted sections of Greenhouse 7, behind biometric locks and containment fields, grew the products of Project Genesis. These were not crops intended to feed humanity, but biological weapons disguised as agricultural research. Every leaf, every root, every cell had been engineered for one purpose: defending human territory against any threat that might emerge from the darkness between stars. Dr. Vasquez, to the communications center, please. Priority Alpha. Marcus Chen's voice crackled over the station's intercom system, interrupting her thoughts. The young communications officer sounded unusually tense, which immediately put Elena on alert. Marcus was typically unflappable, having served as communications specialist on 3 previous frontier missions before accepting the position at Verdun 7. In 5 years of running the station, Alina had learned to trust her team's instincts completely. The Priority Alpha designation made Alina's blood run cold. It was a code they had established for only one type of emergency: potential hostile contact. In all their years of operation, they had never needed to use it. The station's location in unexplored space had been specifically chosen to avoid such complications. Alina made her way quickly through the connecting corridors that linked the various sections of the station. The transparent walkways offered spectacular views of the surrounding valley, where neat rows of experimental crops stretched toward the horizon like a patchwork quilt of green and gold. The walls were lined with monitoring displays showing atmospheric readings, crop growth statistics, weather patterns, and ecological data from across the planet. Everything appeared normal, which made Marcus' urgent summons even more concerning. The station operated on a carefully orchestrated routine that rarely varied. Morning briefings at 800, field work from 900 to 1200, laboratory analysis during the afternoon heat, and evening data compilation before the daily report transmission to Earth Command. Unexpected interruptions to this schedule usually meant equipment failures, medical emergencies, or dangerous weather conditions. Priority Alpha meant something far worse. The communications center was located in the station's central hub, a cylindrical building that housed the administrative offices, living quarters, and essential systems. The structure rose 5 stories above ground and extended 3 levels below. Its reinforced construction designed to withstand the occasional seismic activity that plagued this region of Kepler 442c. Alina found Marcus hunched over his console, his usually neat dark hair disheveled as he fine-tuned the long-range sensor arrays. Captain Zara al-Rashid stood beside him, her military posture a stark contrast to the relaxed atmosphere that usually pervaded the research station. The former Colonial Defense Force officer had been recruited specifically for her expertise in frontier security, though her duties at Verdant 7 typically involved protecting researchers from aggressive local wildlife rather than military threats. Her hand rested unconsciously on the grip of her sidearm, a gesture that Alina had never seen before in all their years working together. Dr. Sarah Kim, the station's biochemist, had also been summoned and stood near the secondary console reviewing atmospheric analysis data. Her expression was grim as she manipulated holographic displays showing molecular compositions and chemical concentrations. Beside her, Tommy Rodriguez from the engineering section monitored the station's defensive systems, such as they were. The communications center buzzed with quiet activity as the senior staff worked frantically to understand whatever threat had triggered the emergency protocols. Alina noted that someone had activated the station's information lockdown procedures, preventing any outgoing transmissions that might reveal their location or capabilities to potential observers. "What's the situation?" Alina asked, noting the tension radiating from every person in the room. Marcus looked up from his screens, his youthful face showing the strain of the past hour. "We got multiple contacts approaching from the outer system. Large ships, definitely not human configuration. They're coming in fast and making no attempt to respond to our standard greeting broadcast or diplomatic protocols." Alina felt her stomach clench as the implication sank in. Verdant 7 was supposed to be safely hidden in unexplored space, far from the territorial disputes and conflicts that occasionally flared between humanity and the various alien species they had encountered during their expansion. The station's location had been carefully chosen from thousands of potential sites, selected specifically to avoid territorial claims or strategic interests from known alien civilizations. "How did they find us?" she asked, though she dreaded the answer. "Unknown," Marcus replied grimly. "Our location coordinates are classified at the highest levels. Either we've been under surveillance for months or they have intelligence capabilities far beyond what we've encountered before." Captain al-Rashid stepped forward, her hand still resting unconsciously on her sidearm. As the station's security chief, she was responsible for the safety of 47 researchers, engineers, and support staff scattered across the facility. It was a responsibility she had accepted gladly when recruited for the position, though the job description had emphasized protection from local predators rather than military threats. "Show me the tactical display," Zara requested, her voice professionally calm despite the circumstances. Marcus manipulated his controls, bringing up a 3-dimensional representation of the Kepler 442 system. 17 red icons moved steadily inward from the outer planets, their trajectories converging on Kepler 442's with mathematical precision. The formation spoke of military discipline and coordinated movement rather than the scattered approach of exploration vessels or merchant craft. 17 vessels, Marcus confirmed, highlighting each contact. The sensor signatures match no known human or friendly alien configurations. Based on their acceleration patterns, energy outputs, and formation discipline, I classify this as a full military flotilla. Elena studied the display with growing dread, watching as the unknown contacts moved steadily toward their peaceful haven. Their trajectory would bring them to planetary orbit in approximately 6 hours, nowhere near enough time to evacuate the station even if they had transport available. The research facility's single cargo vessel, the Harvest Moon, was currently 3 weeks into a supply run to the Centauri colonies and wouldn't return for another month. Any idea who they might be? Alina asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. Dr. James O'Coffer entered the communications center at that moment, his tall frame filling the doorway. The agricultural engineer had been working in the deep hydroponics laboratories when the alert was issued, and his coveralls were still damp from the growing chambers. His usual jovial demeanor was notably absent as he took in the tense atmosphere and the tactical display dominating the room. James had served with Elena since the early days of the Verdant Project, following her from Earth's orbital research stations to this distant frontier facility. His expertise in advanced agricultural engineering had made possible many of their most significant breakthroughs, including several projects that pushed the boundaries between agriculture and biotechnology. If anyone understood the full implications of their research being captured by hostile aliens, it was James. I've been monitoring the alien ship databases, Marcus continued, bringing up comparative analysis screens. The energy signatures and hull configurations show similarities to vessels used by the Ketvar Empire, though there are technological variations that suggest significant improvements or modifications. Elena's blood turned to ice at the mention of the Ketvar. Among all the alien species humanity had encountered during its expansion across the galaxy, the Ketvar were among the most aggressively territorial. Their empire had been built through systematic conquest and resource extraction, leaving behind a trail of depleted worlds and enslaved populations across 3 galactic spiral arms. Intelligence reports from the Colonial Defense Force described the Ketvar as a militaristic society that viewed expansion and conquest as fundamental rights rather than political choices. They had clashed with human colonies on several previous occasions, though never this far from established space. Their presence here suggested either extraordinary bad luck or deliberate intelligence gathering that had somehow identified Verdant 7 as a target worth pursuing. What would the Ketvar want with an agricultural research station? James asked, his Nigerian accent becoming more pronounced as stress crept into his voice. We're not exactly a strategic military target or resource extraction site. Zara's expression darkened as she considered the implications. Intelligence gathering, most likely. The Ketvar economy is fundamentally based on strip mining conquered worlds and exploiting conquered populations. They probably see our advanced agricultural research as valuable technology to be seized and our personnel as potential sources of information about human expansion plans. Dr. Kim looked up from her chemical analysis console. There's another possibility. Our atmospheric processing techniques and genetic modification research could be extremely valuable to any species attempting to terraform captured worlds. The Ketvar have a reputation for rapid planetary exploitation followed by abandonment. Our research could help them maintain productive colonies on damaged worlds. Elena began pacing the small communication center, her mind racing through possibilities and contingencies. Verdant 7 had been designed as a peaceful research facility with minimal defensive capabilities. Their security systems were primarily intended to protect against aggressive local wildlife and prevent unauthorized access to sensitive research areas. Against a military flotilla, they were essentially helpless using conventional defensive strategies. The station's 47 residents were scientists, engineers, botanists, and support staff, not soldiers. Elena herself had advanced degrees in xenobotany and atmospheric engineering, with additional training in project management and colonial administration. Her team included some of humanity's most brilliant agricultural minds, but none of them had signed up expecting to face military combat against hostile aliens. "We need to contact Earth Command immediately," Elena decided, her training taking over despite the desperate circumstances. "Even if help can't arrive in time, they need to know what's happening here. Our research data alone represents decades of agricultural advancement." Marcus shook his head grimly. "I've been trying to establish communication for the past 90 minutes. Something is actively jamming our long-range communications arrays. We can receive incoming signals normally, but nothing is getting out beyond local system range." The implication was chilling and clear. The approaching fleet was already implementing sophisticated siege tactics, cutting off Verdant 7 from outside assistance and preventing any warning from reaching human space. Elena felt the weight of command responsibility settling on her shoulders like a physical burden. Every person on this station was depending on her leadership, and she had no military experience or training to guide her decisions. "How long do we have?" she asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. "At their current rate of approach, approximately 5 hours and 20 minutes until the leave vessels enter orbit," Marcus replied after consulting his calculations. "Assuming they deploy landing forces immediately, we might have 6 hours before hostile troops reach the station perimeter." Elena closed her eyes, thinking furiously about their limited options. 6 hours wasn't enough time to hide the station's most sensitive research, destroy critical equipment, or implement any conventional evacuation procedures. But perhaps it was enough time for something the Ketvar wouldn't expect from a peaceful agricultural facility, something that would turn their greatest weakness into an unexpected strength. The seeds of an idea began forming in her mind, a desperate plan that would require sacrificing everything they had built in exchange for the slimmest chance of survival. She opened her eyes and looked around the room at her dedicated team, seeing the same mixture of fear and determination reflected in their faces. "James," she said suddenly, her voice carrying a new note of authority. "Project Genesis. What's the current status of our bioweapon research protocols?" Dr. O'Keefe's eyes widened as he understood the implications of her question. Project Genesis was Verdant 7's most highly classified research program, a terraforming initiative that pushed the boundaries of agricultural science into territory that could only be described as biological warfare. The project involved creating aggressive plant species capable of rapidly transforming planetary environments, organisms so effective at spreading and adapting that they bordered on being weapons of mass destruction. "The base genetic strains are viable and ready for implementation," James said carefully, choosing his words with scientific precision. "We've successfully tested them in controlled laboratory environments and limited field trials. But Elena, we've never attempted large-scale deployment under combat conditions. The environmental risks are catastrophic." "Explain the risks to someone without a doctorate in biological warfare," Zara interjected. James took a deep breath before responding. "Project Genesis involves releasing every modified organism we've developed over the past 5 years simultaneously. The atmospheric processors would be reconfigured to disperse airborne spores and chemical agents. The irrigation systems would carry modified bacteria and aggressive plant seeds throughout the soil network. Within hours, the entire local ecosystem would be transformed into something hostile to most forms of life. Including us," Dr. Kim added pointedly. Elena nodded, understanding the magnitude of what she was proposing. Project Genesis had been developed as a last resort terraforming option for dead worlds where conventional agriculture was impossible and normal colonization efforts had failed completely. The modified plants were designed to be incredibly aggressive, capable of surviving in virtually any environment and spreading with frightening speed. Once released, they would be nearly impossible to control or contain. "We understand these organisms better than anyone," Elena said quietly. "We designed their genetic structures, programmed their behavioral responses, and developed the chemical compounds that can control their growth patterns. If anyone can survive in a Genesis environment, it's the people who created it." Marcus looked up from his sensor displays with growing urgency. "The alien fleet has begun active scanning of the planet. They'll have detailed readings of our installation and defensive capabilities within the next hour." Elena made her decision with the cold calculation of someone who had run out of alternatives. James, begin Genesis preparation immediately. I want every modified species ready for coordinated deployment. Zara, implement emergency protocols and brief all personnel on survival procedures. Marcus, monitor the approaching fleet and prepare for possible communication attempts. As her team dispersed to carry out their orders, Elena remained in the communication center, staring at the tactical display that showed 17 alien warships approaching their peaceful haven. The Ketvar ships continued their relentless advance, unaware that they were flying toward what would soon become humanity's most dangerous biological experiment. Elena thought about the innocent tomatoes she had been tending that morning, their bright red fruits hiding genetic modifications that could adapt to almost any environment. Soon, those same adaptive capabilities would be weaponized and turned toward a very different purpose. The Ketvar expected to find a helpless research station populated by defenseless scientists, but they were about to discover that humanity's greatest strength had always been the ability to turn any situation into a weapon. The countdown to Genesis had begun, and Verdant 7 would never be the same again. In 6 hours, this peaceful valley would transform into something that would haunt alien nightmares for generations to come. Seeds of Defiance. General Vorthak stood on the command bridge of his flagship, the Crimson Talon, watching the primitive human settlement grow larger on the main viewing screen. His scaled hands gripped the polished metal command rail as he studied the target that would mark his 37th successful conquest for the glorious Ketvar Empire. The agricultural station below looked pathetically vulnerable from this orbital vantage point. Its collection of transparent growing domes and simple prefabricated buildings scattered across the valley floor like children's toys abandoned in a garden. The general's reptilian features bore the distinctive markings of high military rank. Ceremonial scarification along his jaw lines, implanted honor spikes protruding from his skull crest, and the deep emerald scales that marked him as a member of the warrior caste. His uniform was adorned with campaign ribbons representing conquests across 3 galactic spiral arms, each one a testament to the Ketvar Empire's inexorable expansion across known space. Fleet Commander, his tactical officer reported with the crisp efficiency expected of Ketvar military personnel. Our deep scans confirmed the initial intelligence reports. 47 human life signs detected, minimal defensive capabilities observed, no orbital weapons platforms or shield generators identified. The settlement appears to be exactly what our advanced reconnaissance indicated, a civilian agricultural research facility. Vorthak's scaled lips pulled back in what passed for a smile among his species, revealing rows of sharp teeth that had evolved for tearing flesh rather than consuming the processed nutrients that sustain modern Ketvar society. The general had built his reputation by identifying and exploiting weakness wherever he found it, and this human facility represented weakness in its purest, most defenseless form. The target possessed no military escorts patrolling the system perimeter, no defensive installations protecting the planetary approaches, and no strategic value beyond the agricultural resources they could harvest and the human slaves they could capture for interrogation. It was precisely the type of easy victory that the Imperial High Command appreciated, a conquest that would yield valuable resources while costing minimal military assets. Excellent, Vorthak rumbled, his voice carrying the natural authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. Deploy landing forces according to standard occupation protocols. I want 3 full battalions on the surface within the next 2 hours. Establish control of their central facilities and begin systematic cataloging of resources for extraction. The bridge erupted into controlled activity as his orders were transmitted throughout the fleet. Ketvar military doctrine emphasized overwhelming force applied with surgical precision, designed to discourage resistance before it could organize. The general turned to his intelligence officer, a smaller Ketvar whose nervous demeanor and lighter scales reflected his lowercase status within their rigid social hierarchy. Remind me of our xenobiological team's assessment of these human agricultural specimens, Vorthak commanded. Sir, preliminary scans indicate extensive genetic modification throughout their crop varieties, the intelligence officer replied, consulting his datapad with trembling claws. The humans appear to have developed several revolutionary strains of Earth vegetation, specifically adapted for colonial environments. The research data alone could prove worth substantial credits to our agricultural development divisions. Vorthak nodded approvingly as he considered the strategic implications. The Ketvar Empire's rapid expansion across multiple star systems had left many of their conquered worlds depleted and barely habitable. Strip mining operations typically exhausted planetary resources within a few decades, forcing the Empire to constantly seek new territories to exploit. Advanced agricultural techniques could prove invaluable for maintaining productive colonies on marginal worlds that might otherwise be abandoned. What is the estimated value of this acquisition? The general inquired. Conservative estimates suggest the agricultural technology could extend the productive lifespan of conquered worlds by 30 to 50%. The intelligence officer responded. Combined with the human research personnel we'll capture, this operation could yield strategic advantages worth millions of Imperial credits. The general's satisfaction increased as he contemplated the career advancement that such a successful operation would bring. The Imperial High Command rewarded commanders who could deliver valuable resources while minimizing military expenditure, and this conquest promised to do exactly that. A defenseless research station staffed by civilian scientists represented the ideal target for an ambitious military officer. Far below on the planet's surface, Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in the center of Greenhouse 7, surrounded by her research team as they made desperate final preparations for Project Genesis. The air hummed with nervous energy and barely controlled panic as scientists and engineers worked frantically to convert 5 years of careful agricultural research into a weapon of unprecedented biological warfare. The greenhouse had been transformed into a command center for humanity's most dangerous scientific experiment. Workstations that normally displayed crop growth statistics now showed biological weapon deployment schedules. Growing beds that usually nurtured peaceful vegetables had been converted into breeding chambers for aggressive modified organisms. The transparent walls that had previously protected delicate plants from harsh weather now served as barriers containing humanity's most terrifying. Elena had been dreading this question, knowing that her answer would determine whether her team would support the desperate plan or demand alternatives that didn't exist. We'll have approximately 25 minutes from initial activation to reach the designated protected zones, she explained, her voice steadier than she felt. The modified plants are genetically programmed to recognize our specific human pheromone signatures and avoid areas that have been treated with the inhibitor compounds. She gestured toward a collection of emergency supply packs that had been hastily assembled. Each pack contained breathing apparatus, chemical neutralizers, and synthetic pheromone generators that would theoretically allow humans to survive in the hostile environment they were about to create. As long as we remain in the designated safe areas and maintain our protective equipment, we should be able to survive the initial transformation phase, Elena continued. The underground storage areas have been converted into emergency shelters with independent air filtration systems. Captain Al-Rashid approached from the communications section, her military bearing unchanged despite the desperate circumstances. Her expression was grim as she delivered the latest intelligence update. Marcus confirms that the alien fleet has begun launching landing craft. We have approximately 75 minutes before the first Ketvar troops establish a perimeter around the station. Major Zethkol knew that everything had gone catastrophically wrong when Corporal Vashin simply vanished between one step and the next, disappearing into what had appeared to be innocent flowering vegetation. The young Ketvar soldier had been walking point through the increasingly dense plant growth that surrounded the human research station when a massive flowering specimen, easily 3 meters across, suddenly snapped shut around him like a living bear trap constructed from petals and thorns. The corporal's terrified scream cut off abruptly, muffled by layers of modified plant tissue that began secreting digestive enzymes immediately upon contact with alien biology. The major watched in horror as the carnivorous plant's exterior pulsed with predatory satisfaction, its bioluminescent markings shifting from passive green to aggressive red as it began the process of breaking down its prey. Fall back. Establish defensive positions. Major Zethkol shouted into his communication system, but his words were nearly drowned out by the rustling and creaking of plant life that seemed to move with deliberate, malevolent purpose. What had begun as a straightforward occupation mission had transformed into a biological nightmare that defied every assumption in Ketvar military doctrine. The remaining troops of his advanced squad tried desperately to retreat toward their landing zone, but found their escape route systematically blocked by vines thick as steel cables that hadn't been present just moments before. The plants moved with predatory intelligence rather than simple biological response, weaving together to form barriers while creating funnel-shaped passages that herded the alien soldiers toward larger, more dangerous specimens lurking in the increasingly hostile vegetation. Sergeant Krexhall raised his energy weapon toward an advancing cluster of thorn vines, the standard-issue plasma rifle that had proven effective against dozens of different enemy types in previous campaigns. He fired a sustained burst directly into the plant mass, watching in mounting horror as the damaged tissue simply regenerated within seconds, the organic matter rebuilding itself faster than the weapon could inflict damage. "Sir, our weapons are completely ineffective," the sergeant reported with barely controlled panic. "The vegetation is regenerating faster than we can damage it. It's like the plants are designed specifically to counter our technology." From her underground command center, Elena watched the unfolding battle through her network of concealed cameras positioned throughout the research station. The feeds provided multiple angles of the Ketvar troops experiencing Phase 3 of Project Genesis, where the modified ecosystem transitioned from passive transformation to active predation. 5 years of agricultural research had been compressed and weaponized into a biological defense system that turned the entire concept of territorial warfare on its head. The underground facility buzzed with activity as her team monitored the deployment of humanity's most desperate and terrifying scientific achievement. Dr. Kim worked frantically at her biochemical monitoring station, tracking atmospheric compositions and chemical concentrations with the intensity of someone conducting a symphony of death. Banks of displays showed real-time biological readings that would have been considered impossible under normal scientific parameters. The carnivorous hybrids are responding perfectly to the pheromone triggers we programmed into their genetic structure, James reported with scientific enthusiasm that barely masked his underlying terror at what they had unleashed. The atmospheric modifications are creating exactly the confusion and disorientation effects that our theoretical models predicted. Dr. Kim looked up from her chemistry station, her face illuminated by the eerie glow of her monitoring equipment. The psychoactive spores are reaching optimal concentration throughout the target zones. The alien troops should be experiencing significant cognitive impairment, hallucinations, and respiratory distress within the next few minutes. Alina felt a complex mixture of emotions as she watched their desperate gamble unfold in real time. Part of her scientific mind was horrified by the violence they had unleashed, the transformation of their peaceful research into an instrument of biological warfare. But a larger part of her consciousness was grimly satisfied that humanity's most vulnerable outpost was proving capable of defending itself against overwhelming military odds through pure scientific ingenuity. On the surface, Major Zeth Cole was receiving a brutal education in the limitations of conventional military thinking when faced with an enemy that operated outside all known parameters. His troops were falling victim to an ecosystem that seemed specifically designed to kill their particular species. Private Nexer stumbled into a patch of innocent-looking purple flowers and immediately began convulsing as neurotoxic pollen overwhelmed his emergency respiratory filters, his scaled body writhing in agony as alien biochemistry attacked his nervous system. Corporal Thexman attempted to cut through a cluster of blocking vines with his ceremonial combat blade, triggering a violent defensive response that released a cloud of molecular acid capable of eating through Ketvar body armor in seconds. The Major watched helplessly as one of his most experienced soldiers dissolved before his eyes, the acid consuming organic and metallic materials with equal efficiency. "Command, this is Strike Force Alpha requesting immediate emergency extraction," the Major transmitted desperately to the orbiting fleet. "We are encountering hostile biological weapons that exceed all known threat parameters. Transport craft needed for emergency evacuation of surviving personnel." The response from orbit carried troubling implications that made the Major's situation even more desperate. Major Zeth Cole, we are detecting massive atmospheric interference around your position. Transport craft cannot safely approach for pickup operations due to unknown environmental hazards. Then send in additional ground forces, Zeth Cole demanded, watching another of his soldiers disappear into the aggressive vegetation that seemed to be actively hunting his remaining troops. We need heavy weapons specialists and environmental warfare equipment immediately. General Vorthak monitored the chaos unfolding on the planet's surface with growing alarm and professional embarrassment. His tactical display showed 17 separate life signs from the initial landing force of 48 elite troops, with that number decreasing steadily as his soldiers fell victim to an enemy unlike anything in Ketvar military experience or xenobiology databases. The general's scaled features twisted into an expression of frustrated rage as he contemplated the implications of this disaster. The Ketvar Empire had built its reputation on swift, decisive victories against technologically inferior opponents. The idea that a handful of human agricultural researchers could defeat a full battalion of elite shock troops was not just militarily embarrassing. It threatened the fundamental assumptions upon which their entire expansion strategy was based. Complete analysis of surface conditions, he demanded from his scientific advisory staff with barely controlled fury. Sir, the entire area surrounding the human facility has undergone catastrophic ecological transformation, his xenobiology advisor reported nervously, knowing that bearing bad news to Vorthak often resulted in summary execution. Plant growth rates exceed any known biological parameters in our databases. The atmospheric composition is shifting rapidly into ranges toxic to Ketvar physiology, and we are detecting numerous hostile organisms that were completely absent from our initial reconnaissance scans. Vorthak's claws scraped against the metal command rail as he struggled to comprehend what he was being told. Are you informing me that a handful of human farmers have successfully defeated an entire battalion of Ketvar shock troops using nothing but modified agriculture? Sir, these are not normal agricultural plants, the advisor continued with growing desperation. The biological warfare applications of this technology exceed our current understanding of genetic modification. The humans have essentially transformed their research station into a living weapons system that operates on principles we have never encountered. The general stared at his tactical displays, watching as his elite forces were systematically eliminated by an enemy that shouldn't exist according to any known scientific principles. The Ketvar Empire had conquered dozens of worlds using conventional military doctrine, but they had never encountered biological warfare on this unprecedented scale. The humans had somehow turned their greatest perceived weakness, their lack of natural defenses, into an unimaginable strategic strength. Below in the underground command center, Elena received an incoming transmission on an emergency military frequency that she hadn't expected the aliens to know existed. Captain Al-Rashid quickly patched the signal through to her station, and she found herself facing the scaled visage of a Ketvar military officer whose expression revealed barely controlled panic. Human Commander, Major Zeth Cole's voice crackled through the communication system with desperation that transcended species barriers. I am Major Zeth Cole of the Ketvar Imperial Forces. I formally request immediate cessation of hostilities and guarantee of safe passage for my remaining personnel. Elena looked around at her team, seeing the same mixture of exhaustion, determination, and grim satisfaction reflected in their faces. They had sacrificed everything they had worked to build, transforming their peaceful research station into a biological horror that would require decades to fully understand and contain. There was no possibility of returning to their previous lives, but they had achieved something unprecedented in human history. Major, she replied with professional calm that belied the chaos surrounding them, you are currently trespassing on human territory and threatening the lives of civilian researchers conducting legitimate scientific work. We are prepared to discuss terms for your withdrawal from this system. Withdrawal? The alien officer's voice carried disbelief that bordered on outrage. You have deployed biological weapons of mass destruction against military forces, conducting authorized resource acquisition operations. We have defended our home using the scientific tools available to us, Elena corrected firmly. If you wish your remaining troops to survive the next 60 minutes, I strongly suggest you listen carefully to our proposed terms." James looked up from his monitoring station with growing urgency. "Elena, the Phase 4 organisms are beginning to show signs of activation. If those alien troops don't evacuate immediately, even our protective measures won't be sufficient to control what happens next." Elena understood the terrifying implications of what James was reporting. Phase 4 represented the final stage of Project Genesis, where the modified ecosystem became completely autonomous and began expanding beyond its original program boundaries. Once fully activated, the biological weapon would transform the entire planet into an aggressive superorganism hostile to all non-adapted life forms, including the humans who had created it. "Major Zeth Cole," she continued with increased urgency, "you have exactly 35 minutes to reach minimum safe distance from this facility. My people will provide you with chemical neutralizing compounds that will allow relatively safe passage through the modified vegetation. In return, you will transmit a complete and accurate report of this encounter to your command structure and any other military organizations within your sphere of influence." And why would the Ketvar Empire agree to such terms? The alien officer demanded, though his voice carried less conviction than before. Elena's voice hardened with the authority of someone who held all the strategic advantages. "Because in 35 minutes, this entire planet becomes permanently uninhabitable for your species and most other known forms of life. The organisms you have encountered so far represent merely the defensive perimeter systems. The real biological weapons are just beginning to achieve full operational status." On the surface, the surviving Ketvar troops huddled in a small clearing that their weapons had managed to maintain through continuous energy discharge, their emergency environmental suits providing minimal protection against an ecosystem that seemed determined to dissolve, digest, or poison every molecule of alien biology it encountered. The very air had become hostile, thick with spores and chemical compounds that triggered severe allergic reactions in Ketvar physiology, despite their technological countermeasures. Major Zethkal made his decision with the pragmatic calculation of a professional soldier who recognized when further resistance would result in total annihilation. "State your terms for guaranteed safe passage." "Complete and immediate withdrawal of all Ketvar military forces from this star system," Elena replied with the authority of someone dictating terms to a defeated enemy. "Formal agreement that no further military action will be taken against human agricultural facilities anywhere in colonized space. And comprehensive dissemination of this encounter report to your intelligence networks and military command structure. You want us to publicize your biological weapons capabilities. I want every potential aggressor in this region of the galaxy to understand precisely what happens when you attack humanity's agricultural installations," Elena said firmly. "We are farmers and researchers, Major, not soldiers or conquerors. But we are exceptionally good at making things grow, and we have just demonstrated that our agricultural expertise can be applied in ways that conventional military thinking never anticipated." The negotiation concluded with desperate efficiency, as the surviving Ketvar troops received emergency chemical neutralizers that would theoretically allow them to retreat through the increasingly hostile vegetation. As they struggled toward their designated extraction point, Major Zethkol couldn't help but notice the continuing expansion of the modified ecosystem beyond the research station's original boundaries. Vines were already reaching into previously unaffected areas, and the atmospheric changes were spreading across the entire valley with geometric progression. The biological weapon showed no signs of self-limitation, instead appearing to gain strength and complexity as it expanded. Within hours, the entire planet would be transformed into something that resembled a living predator more than a terrestrial environment. From orbit, General Vorthak watched his forces evacuate with a mixture of relief and professional humiliation that would haunt his military career. The human facility below continued its transformation, becoming something that resembled a massive organism more than a research installation. His tactical advisors estimated that the biological weapon would render the entire planet uninhabitable for Ketvar physiology within days, possibly spreading to neighboring worlds if left unchecked. Fleet withdrawal protocol authorized, he ordered with the bitter taste of unprecedented defeat. All ships prepare for immediate departure from this system. No vessel is to remain within 10 light hours of this planet. As the Ketvar fleet fled the system in complete disarray, Alina and her team remained in their underground sanctuary, monitoring the expansion of their creation with a mixture of scientific fascination and existential dread. Project Genesis had succeeded beyond their wildest theoretical projections, but the cost was everything they had worked to build over the previous 5 years. How long before the planetary ecosystem stabilizes into a manageable state? Alina asked James, though she suspected she wouldn't like the answer. Conservative estimates suggest approximately 8 to 10 months, he replied quietly, his voice carrying the weight of their sacrifice. The ecosystem will eventually reach biological equilibrium and become manageable for adapted human habitation, but it will never return to its original pristine state. Alina nodded, understanding that they have fundamentally altered not just their home world, but the entire strategic landscape of this region of space. Word of humanity's biological warfare capabilities would spread throughout alien civilization like a virus, carrying the simple but terrifying message. Human agricultural stations were never as defenseless as they appeared, and attacking them carried consequences that conventional military thinking could never anticipate. 8 months later, the rebuilt and heavily modified Verdun 7 research station stood at the center of a carefully controlled biological ecosystem that represented humanity's most advanced achievement in defensive agriculture. The facility had been reconstructed with extensive modifications designed to control and channel the aggressive organisms that now dominated the planetary environment. Alina stood in her new office, protected by multiple layers of biological barriers and atmospheric filters, watching through reinforced transparent aluminum windows as her team worked among plants that could switch from peaceful agriculture to lethal biological warfare at the activation of predetermined genetic triggers. The ecosystem had been tamed and channeled into productive purposes, but evidence of its defensive capabilities remained clearly visible in the predatory plants that lined the facility perimeter and the atmospheric processors that could flood targeted areas with toxic compounds within minutes. Reports from across human space indicated that no alien military force had attempted to attack any agricultural facility since detailed accounts of the Verdun 7 incident had spread through galactic intelligence networks. The mere possibility that any human farming installation might be equipped with similar biological defenses had fundamentally altered the strategic calculations of potential aggressors. Marcus approached with a communication tablet containing the day's intelligence reports. Alina, we're receiving formal requests from 18 different frontier colonies for Genesis-modified crop strains and defensive biological packages. Earth Command wants to know if we can provide comprehensive defensive agricultural systems for all frontier settlements within the next 2 years. Alina smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had discovered that humanity's greatest weakness could become its most formidable strength. The galaxy's most peaceful farmers had become its most feared defensive specialists, and they had accomplished this transformation by simply being exceptionally good at making things grow in ways that alien military minds could never anticipate or counter. The universe had learned a valuable lesson about the dangers of underestimating human agricultural science, and Alina was certain that lesson would not be forgotten anytime soon.